he said, I understand what you're really trying to do. You want us to know about Jesus. I get it, but you need to find a different way to say it because you're going to get yourself killed. That started us on a huge journey of realizing what we thought was the gospel was not the gospel.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbert with Inspired. Inspired, if you're new to us, is all about meeting different people from across the spectrum of human experience that have got great stories to inspire and stir our faith. I'm fed up of being relentlessly bombarded in the media by a negative narrative that just induces fear and anxiety and depression. And what we need is to hear from people that have experienced God. And in an hour's time, I've got no doubt that you're going to leave inspired because we got with us the wonderful Donna Winship. Welcome, Donna.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Simon. I'm thrilled to be here.
So good to have you. So Matt Stott is a dear friend of mine, and you appeared on his brilliant podcast, Through Frontiers, a Royal Mission, and I heard the stories. I was just totally beautifully edified and blown away by them. So Donna and husband Jamie are co-founders of Identity Exchange, which is basically looking about living fearlessly in one's true identity. And she spent 25 years plus raising a family in Southeast Asia, and lots of crazy stories. So listen, I'm aware we're time constrained, so let's just get straight in there, Donna. So Jewish heritage, tell us about your background.
Yeah, I was born and raised in America, in the southeast part of the United States. Both sets of my grandparents immigrated to this country at the turn of the century, early 1900s. If any of your listeners have seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof, they were escaping the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Russia that was happening at that time period, the pogroms and what eventually led up to the Holocaust. The family members that were able to escape did, the ones that didn't surely perished. Very difficult time. So I often feel just the fact that I'm alive is very miraculous. My mother's side of the family was very Orthodox, my mom grew up in a very small town in the mountains of Virginia. That's a whole story in and of itself, how my grandmother got there. And my dad's family moved all around the southeastern part of the United States. They were both in retail. And my parents, met through some family events, two families coming together. And I grew up in a very conservative Jewish home, went to Hebrew school, had a bat mitzvah, just the whole nine yards of that. And really loved our religious traditions. It was a great foundation, but it also left me very empty. The focus in Judaism is on following the traditions and the law, and it leaves one with a lot of sense of guilt if you don't do that. And because of the persecution that Jews have suffered over centuries, think back to the Crusades, suffering at the hands of Christians, marching through Europe back to the Holy Land, killing all the Jews and Muslims in their path, trying to retake Jerusalem. Then later, the Spanish Inquisition, just every several hundred years, there seemed to be persecution of Jews, leading up to the 20th century. And so there was always kind of this intergenerational sense of, this guilt and shame and fear around being Jewish. And so, it was fine in my little Jewish community when I was at youth group or at Hebrew school, but I went to a big public school in my city and didn't really want people to know I was Jewish. I'd experienced some anti-Semitism, not anything horrible, but I had experienced it. So I always felt different. I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I didn't belong, and had some other experiences that made me feel that way. And because of that, in childhood, we're forming an identity. You go through stages of development, every human being, where your identity is being formed. And when I say identity, I mean the core essence of who you are. You have a spiritual identity that you're born with. God knit you together in your mother's womb, and he formed you. And that identity is developing as you grow up. And then, of course, you have life experiences that overshadow that identity, and you start to develop a false identity. And I think every person listening can relate to that. If I just say, tell me what your biggest fear is. Deep down, what's your biggest fear? And I don't mean a fear out here like I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to get cancer. I mean, deep down inside, what's your biggest fear? Do you feel like you're unworthy? Do you feel like you're inadequate? Do you feel like you're alone? For me, it was this sense of I was developing this fear of I don't belong, I don't fit in, I'm different. Even though I had this great Jewish community, I was in this public school system, and I started to develop that. And then other things were happening in my home. I came from a very stable home, but just sibling rivalry and things like that, where I always felt like, same, I didn't fit in, something's wrong with me, I don't belong. And so growing up with the Jewish tradition and feeling like I could never keep the law, there's a lot of laws in Judaism, but feeling like I could never keep the law and I must be guilty before God because I can't do that. This high expectation to keep the traditions of Judaism from my parents and look at everything my grandparents suffered so that I could be free to live in the land of America, right? And live this American dream. All they suffered so I could have this. That's a lot of weight on a person.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure a lot of people relate to that because if your audience is American, most Americans come from immigrant, grandparents and great grandparents. And so that's a heavy weight to carry. So I was carrying around a lot of guilt and shame as I entered teenage years, which are really hard anyway. And then the third thing deep down inside that I carried with this very strong religious identity of Judaism was just a fear of death. And if you think about the Old Testament, for your listeners that know the scriptures, it doesn't really talk about heaven or hell. We put such a strong emphasis on that in the Christian world, but think about it in the Old Testament. That is not really a big subject in the Old Testament, what happens when you die. And I remember asking my parents when I was really young, you're 6 or 7. I remember our dog was hit by a car. And I was about 7 years old. And suddenly I realized, I'm going to die too one day. This is going to happen to me, not hit by a car, but my life's going to end. Asking my parents, and they just kind of brushed the subject off. They wouldn't answer don't think about that. You don't have to think about that now. Think about a happy thought. Don't think about that. But because the subject was brushed off, it's all I could think about. And it became terrifying to me because it wasn't answered. It wasn't answered. So something must really be wrong with that question that they won't answer it for me. And it became almost a phobia. I became really frightened of the dark because since I didn't know the answer to the question, I presumed that when you die, you're alone and it's dark and you just go into oblivion. And I didn't know anything about hell. Again, look at the Old Testament. It doesn't really talk about hell. I had no concept of hell. Very opposite of my husband, Jamie. His upbringing was a very strict, legalistic Christian upbringing. And he was told he was going to hell every day of his life. And so he had this terror of maybe I'm not really saved and I'm going to hell. Hell was not in my consciousness.
Sure.
I remember asking my Hebrew school teacher, what happens to you when you die? Oh, you go to the bosom of Abraham. Well, that meant nothing to me. What does that mean? And then I asked my rabbi as I got older, when I was a young teenager, what happens to you when you die? Your soul lives on in the memory of others. Well, this is when I was, in my early teens, starting to experiment, a little bit of smoking and drinking and things like this. Well, if my soul lives on in the memory of others and it has nothing to do with meeting God or, living a good life, like, why not live it up? Why not party it up? Like, why not have as much fun as I can and be known for that? So this haunting of death was always in the back of my mind. And also this idea of identity. I had a strong religious identity as a Jewish person, but deep inside, really, who am I? Why was I born when I was born? Why was I not born a poor child in India eating scraps off the ground? So I had these big life questions as I was growing up that Judaism couldn't answer. Along with this false identity that was developing of I don't fit in, I don't belong, I don't know who I am. So a lot of fears.
So you then meet Jamie, who's this random guy who's very abrupt and confrontational in terms of evangelizing you. Tell us what happens next.
Yeah, so I take all these fears and insecurities and go off to university, and I'm dating this guy, and he meets this other guy in the gym. And this guy, he has this big experience with this guy in the gym, and he comes and gets me and says, you have to go meet this guy that I just met. And I'm like, why? I'm busy. I have to study. I had procrastinated. I had some big paper due the next day. No, you have to come right now. And he takes me over to this guy's dorm room and introduces me to the guy. And then the guy I was dating leaves, and he leaves me with this guy and his roommate. And immediately that guy looks at me and starts to share the 4 spiritual laws with me, which I didn't know what that was. Of course, I do now. And the guy looks at me, and no niceties, no polite chit chat, get to know you. He just right in. God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, but you are sinful and separated from him. And therefore you cannot know and experience that plan. I didn't know what he was. It was like he was speaking Chinese to me. I didn't know that language. It was very Christian language, and I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he finally gets to something about going to hell, and I just looked at him and I said, "I'm Jewish. We're the chosen people. You go to hell." And I turned around and walked away. Yes. And he said, "Wait a minute." And he thought to himself, I've never met a Jewish person. God, can you show me how to witness to a Jewish person? How funny is that? Jesus, do you know any Jewish people? Can you tell me how to witness to a Jewish person? Anyway, I ended up being in that dorm room for about 5 hours that night.
Wow.
And then about 5 years later, I married that man. That was Jamie Winship. Yeah. And he realized, he was inspired by the Lord to go into the book I was familiar with. I didn't know anything about the New Testament. Jews don't even consider there is no Old Testament. There's just the scriptures, the Torah. We don't think Old and New Testament. We just think the Torah. And so he really, inspired by the Holy Spirit, went into the Messianic Psalms, the prophetic verses in Isaiah, and started talking to me about that. And I was familiar with those verses. And then he showed me the fulfillment of those in the New Testament. And that was the first time I'd ever looked at the New Testament. And when I left there 5 hours later, it was about 3 a.m, I knew everything he told me was true. But, Simon, I didn't think I could ever believe it. Because I didn't think there was one Jewish person in the history of the universe that believed that Jesus was the Messiah, because I'd never heard of it. But I knew here that it was true. And it took me about 2 years of doing research, talking to my rabbi, talking to my family, which totally rejected and warned me that it was a cult, that Jamie was in a cult. But the thing that really convinced me was not any intellectual, informational conversation. I learned how to pray and I learned how to talk to God, because you see, in Judaism, which came in so handy, for lack of a better term, later when we lived among Muslims, Judaism is very similar to Islam in a lot of ways. In Judaism, we say a lot of prayers in Hebrew by memory. And this is what you're seeing Muslims do when they pray 5 times a day. It's prayers by memory in Arabic. If you live in Indonesia or you live in France and Arabic's not your first language, you're still saying those prayers by memory in Arabic. Well, that's what we did. We said, I didn't know Hebrew except religious Hebrew. So I learned to pray for the first time in English conversationally, and experientially encountered God in a way I had never before. And it was that experiential love relationship that answered all my questions that I had as a teenager. And it was all, I had still had a lot of questions, but it was that experiential encounter that I knew was true and that nobody could take away from me. I didn't have all the answers, but nobody could take that away from me. And it was what I experienced with God that convinced me that it was the truth.
Man. So you get married to Jamie. He joins the police force, becomes has some incredible experiences. Can you share briefly on those?
Yeah, sure. Jamie had a big experience when he was 14 in a movie theater watching the movie Serpico. Again, this is back in the 70s, really showing our age, but had a real sense of calling and a real experience with true identity from that movie. God can use anything to speak to you.
Yeah.
Not just the scriptures, but movies, music, nature. We maybe can get into that later, but and had his sights on being a police officer ever since then. Not just to be a police officer, but a person who cares about justice and serving and protecting. And realized his dream. We got married. He graduated from the police academy and very quickly started solving cases in a way. He would just continually ask God, is there a different way to do this? He went through the police academy and learned all the rules and regulations and was very good at the training. But the first day he got in situations that the police academy didn't teach him how to deal with. And he would just literally pray, God, is there another way to do this? And he would just get these ideas and he would try them. And sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. And I think one of the biggest stories, there's lots of little ones, was there was a kidnapping, a little boy about 9 years old from a bus stop. And, back in the day, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was no technology like that. So every minute that goes by that child is missing, it's more likely that you're not going to find him. And the parents are in the station, they're hysterical. And Jamie looks at him. And by that time I think I was pregnant and we had one little boy. And so, of course, Jamie's projecting how he would feel if it was him. And he just looked at those parents and said, I promise you, we will find your child. And then his partner grabs him and pulls him aside and said, you are not allowed to say that. Why did you say that? And so usually they drove in their cruiser with a partner, but because, this was such a severe thing happening, they all split up. And Jamie went out and he was just saying, God, I know you know where this kid is. I know you know where this kid is. Show me where this kid is. And he was just driving around and this car passed him and he looked over at the driver and the driver just had a weird look on his face. And immediately Jamie just felt sick to his stomach. That was it. God didn't say, there he is. God didn't say, go to this corner. He was just driving around in the vicinity of where it happened. And so he cut him off and pulled him over and jumped out and said, get out of your car and open your trunk right now. Now, the laws then in the state of Virginia, Jamie worked, and you have to have a warrant to search somebody's car. So the driver could have refused, but he didn't. He opened the trunk and the little boy was in the trunk unharmed.
Crazy.
And yeah, Jamie got an award for Officer of the Year because of that case, and really put him on a fast track to become detective. Yeah, so we have a lot of amazing stories like that. But that was a really important lesson, because we didn't know. We were from a very conservative church at that time, and Jamie was from a very traditional, legalistic Christian background. But that really taught us about how to really listen to God. And that was not on our radar anything. Now it's common for us, and much more common in the church world now, listening prayer, hearing from God.
Yeah.
That was unheard of in our circles back then. But it was a big lesson for us of how to tune into that frequency of communicating with God and perceiving how he talks to you.
Yeah.
And just by that hunch, but just by that sense, by that feeling, and not ignoring that. Because later in our journey, we had, a series of events that led to the State Department recruiting Jamie to work for them overseas, which he took the assignment, but he didn't take the job. And that's what led us to work in Southeast Asia for about 10 years. And then we lived in the Middle East over the rest of our career till we came back to the States in 2016. But that recruitment of the State Department is what got us thinking that we should move overseas. And again, he didn't take their job, but he did take the assignment. But in that, we got a lot of training. We went to seminary, and that kind of intuitive gut feeling way of relating to God was trained out of us. Yeah, and we went back to that 4 spiritual laws. We went back to these formulas and methods. And, there's nothing wrong with good training, but there's also something wrong when the training replaces that intuitive experiential relationship with God. Because information, Simon, doesn't change your life. Intellectual information doesn't change your life, and it doesn't change somebody else's life. Transformation is what changes your life. And transformation is based on experience. It's not based on information. Fear does not go away by memorizing a verse. Memorizing a verse is good. You need to know the scripture to know the character of God, so that when you're listening for his voice, you can be certain that it's him. But memorizing a verse doesn't take away fear. Experiencing God is what takes away fear. Think about Mary Magdalene in John chapter 20. She's at the empty tomb, and she sits there in her fear and her pain. She doesn't know that Jesus is going to appear. She doesn't know that she's going to have an encounter with angels. And compare that to Peter and John. They run away and go back to the locked room, hiding in their fear of the Jews. They lock the door and hide. Mary Magdalene doesn't. She stays in her fear and waits. And she encounters the risen Lord Jesus. She's the first one to experience the resurrection. And because of that, he commissions her to go and tell the others, right? Yeah. It's the experience of being with Jesus that changes us. And so that was trained out of us as we went to seminary and all the things to get ready to go overseas. And we lost that sense of just that intuitive how to perceive the communications of God. But God wouldn't let us stay there. We experienced some really hard things. Our first term and we lived in Indonesia. Jamie got arrested. We got spit on in classes. Our house was broken into. Things were stolen from us. The worst was Jamie getting arrested for insulting the Prophet Muhammad, and it carried a 10-year prison sentence. And he was miraculously exonerated at the trial. I mean, he literally hugged and kissed us goodbye. Our kids were about, 8, 6, and 3 when he
Yeah.
went to the trial, and we literally didn't think we'd see him again. And the hardest thing was, when he got arrested, our passports were confiscated and we had no way off the island. We lived on a small island by land, but 2.5 million people, 2.5 million radical Muslims.
Yeah.
And
Go on, tell us the story, because it is absolutely amazing, isn't it? The guy shows up.
Yeah, just briefly. Yeah. So he was arrested and he wasn't being persecuted for being a Christian. We go into another country and we think as Christians, we can just do anything we want. And I mean, it's just not true. And then we say we're being persecuted for the gospel. I mean, it's just not true. He was teaching graduate level English in a university, and he did say something, derogatory about the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. And he got arrested for that. You can't just slam another person's book, another religious book or another religion. You can't be arrogant about your own religion. Even Paul, the apostle, when he's at Mars Hill, says very honorably, I see you have an altar to the unknown God. In him we live and move and have our being. He's quoting poetry about Zeus when he says that. And he's showing great honor and respect. And we didn't do that. And Jamie got arrested, and it carried a 10-year prison sentence. And so the day he went to the trial, when he got there, it was, like a Muslim tribunal. There were about 10 spots. He could have had a lawyer. Jamie could have had an attorney, but nobody would represent him. And it was like Sharia law trial. The man who brought the charges was not there. And so that was very puzzling. And, they read the charges, and right as they're reading him, another man walks in. He's wearing the uniform of a very high level professor. We didn't know him. And I wasn't there. I couldn't come. I was at home with the kids. We had a small team of about 7 people, and we were literally on our faces praying the whole time. And this man walks in, and in English, which is unusual, says who he is. He had been a graduate student, PhD level at Arizona State University. And he stands before the court, and he says, you'll notice this man who brought the charges and stated his position, I think the head of the Islamic Society of Indonesia. He said, you'll notice he's not here. He was killed in a car accident last night. Well, Indonesian people are very spiritual and superstitious, we would say, and so that had everybody freaked out, that the man who brought the charges against this Christian American was killed in a car accident. Like, spiritually, that freaked everybody out. So we didn't know that was going on behind the scenes. And so this man said, I'm his replacement. I just got back from 4 years in Arizona working on this PhD. When I got there, I knew the program was too hard. I knew I was going to fail. I was on an Indonesian government-sponsored scholarship. If I failed, I knew I'd be blackballed from ever having a job in my field, and, would just be a blue-collar worker the rest of my life. And my wife and I were just frantic and pretty much giving up, sitting in our apartment crying. And within that first week, there was a knock at the door. There were 2 other grad students, Americans, saying, we're here to help you. We're in the same program. Anything you need, our wives will show your wife where to shop. We'll show you, how to get around the library and what to do, and, help you study. And so they got us started and showed me the ropes. And within a few months, they invited me to a Wednesday night meeting. And every Wednesday night, I started going with them to a Bible study. And he looked at everybody in the court and said, now, are you going to accuse me of not being a good Muslim because I went to a Bible study every Wednesday night for the 4 years I was in America? And everybody was looking down, like in a position of respect, saying, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir. So Jamie knew he was in a very high position of authority. And the bottom line, he said, now, when I was in America, the Americans really helped me and treated me with respect and made sure that I succeeded in my program. He said, now we have an American in our country and we're going to lock him up and put him in jail. I don't think that's right. And then he just turned around and walked out. And the head of the court just, banged the gavel or whatever. And he said, case dismissed, Mr. Winship, you're free to go. And Jamie ran after the guy, seriously thinking he was an angel. Like, unbelievable that this happened. Yeah. Like, who could have ever dreamed this up, right? And he got outside, and the man was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette. And Jimmy's like, I don't think angels smoke, so he must be a real person. But yeah, everything he said was true. And he was in Jakarta. It was his first day of work because he replaced the man that died. And he saw this case and saw it was an American and flew out to where we were. It's like flying from LA to New York. It was across the country.
Yeah, long way.
And he said, I didn't do this for you. I did this to pay back my friends in Arizona. Even though we didn't know them, but he's like, they helped me, play it forward. And he said, I understand what you're really trying to do. You want us to know about Jesus. I get it, but you need to find a different way to say it because you're going to get yourself killed. And that's what started us on a big journey, Simon. Really, that started us on a huge journey of realizing what we thought was the gospel was not the gospel, because the gospel is good news to people. And whatever we were saying was not good news, right? We thought sharing our faith was trying to get people to believe in something. I don't know what, because we realize this is not what Jesus is doing. Jesus is going around healing people. He's facilitating spiritual transformation and destroying the works of the devil. And that's not what we were doing. We were insulting their religion, insulting their prophet, trying to get them to call themselves Christian, change their name from Muhammad to John. And when you look at the New Testament, the Gospels, Jesus is not doing any of that. And so where did we come up with this? And we were just doing what we were trained to do without questioning it. And that encounter with that man made us question everything and sent us in a 3-year tailspin. It was a dark night of the soul, because our theology was ripped out from under us. And we realized our theology was God and God was not God. Seriously. And we ended up moving to another place in Indonesia, and we met some people who had been there 15 or 20 years longer than us that started mentoring us. And we had this huge switch from what I would say transactional religion, Christianity, to transformational relationship in the kingdom of God. Jesus talks about the kingdom of God over 100 times in the 4 Gospels. How many times does he talk about converting to Christianity?
0.
How much do we talk about experiencing Jesus in the kingdom of God? And how much do we talk about converting to Christianity? We just have it so upside down. We have it so upside down. And so we realized that the most important thing in discipleship starts at the first meeting with someone. And when you meet someone, you can almost guarantee that they are in what we call a separation worldview and a false identity. They're separate from themselves, they're separate from God, and they're separate from other people because they're afraid. Deep down, they're afraid they're not good enough. They're afraid they're not smart enough. They're afraid that God's mad at them, that God's disappointed in them, and they're afraid that they need other people's approval to be accepted. That's what I mean by separation worldview. And they're in a false identity, trying to prove their worth, feeling deep down inside, like what I said before, I don't fit in, I don't belong, I'm unworthy. And then we develop all these coping mechanisms so that we don't feel that way. Overachieving, control freak, perfectionist, and we're proud of it. I'm a perfectionist. What's your greatest weakness at a job interview? I'm a perfectionist. That's a coping mechanism, because deep down inside, you don't feel like you're good enough, right? Because something happened to you in your formative years where you felt out of control. And so you become a control freak, or you become a perfectionist, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you moved through a number of nations.
Yeah.
How this worked out? Go on, give some stories of the gospel of the kingdom, how your language changed, and the beauty of it, because you got some stunning stories, I know.
Yeah. So first we changed. We have this motto: you can't give away what you don't have.
Yeah.
And so we were mentored by these other folks that had been in country 15, 20 years longer than us. And they really taught us these principles of, like I said, the first element of discipleship, the first element and most important element of our faith is hearing from God. Before you get into theology, before you start teaching about the character of God, you'll learn about the character of God if you learn to hear from God. Jesus says in John 10, my sheep know my voice. They follow me, and I call them by name. Right? Jesus is saying that. So let's learn to hear his voice and learn what he calls us. He has a unique identity and destiny for every single person. We do have corporate identities: child of God, priests of God, chosen, holy. But Isaiah 43:1 says it, and then it says it again in Revelation 2:17, just giving the verses for reference. I have called you by your name, so you will know that you are mine. That's the point of the identity. It's your belonging to God. They started mentoring us in that. And as soon as you make that your own and experience it yourself, it just naturally overflows from you. I don't need a training manual. I don't need a formula. I don't need 4 points. It's good news. Hey, I learned to hear from God. Can I help you hear his voice? Here's the prayer that changed my life, Simon. God, what do you want me to know? Seriously, I was mentored by these amazing ladies that were leading Muslim women into encounters with Jesus through dreams and visions. I asked them to teach me. They looked at me and said, Donna, you can't give away what you don't have. We won't teach you, but we'll help you experience Jesus in a new way, and then you'll know what to do. You'll naturally know what to do. And that's exactly what happened. And the first thing they taught me to do was to pray that prayer: God, what do you want me to know? And so one of my favorite stories is I learned to receive that for myself, receive it and believe it, so I could reflect it in other people's lives. Our second term in Indonesia was like our training ground. Jesus didn't start in Jerusalem. He formed his team. He took a bunch of nobodies from nowhere and started a revolution, right? But he formed his team in the Galilee, where it's beautiful and it's nice and it's on the sea. And he prepared them then for what was going to happen in Jerusalem, where the chaos was. And so we had that experience our second term in Indonesia. And then we went to the iron belly of Islam during a war, and it's called Iraq. It's called Baghdad. In 2003, we were there for about a year and a half. It got too violent for us to be able to stay. We had teenage kids with us. It was an amazing 18 months. It's hard to believe we went there during a war and we took our kids and people told us we were crazy, but we had learned to tune into the voice of God. We knew what it sounded like. It's like tuning a radio at that frequency. And once you hear it, and you get used to what it sounds like, you can't unhear it, and you know it. And, people told us we're crazy, we're poor stewards of the children God had given us. But I call it grace for the place. Like they didn't have the grace to go. So of course they were afraid. Of course they thought we were crazy, but we had the grace to go. And so we were excited to go. And it was some of the most amazing time of our lives. But one of the stories I love is that I had become friends with a young woman, and I'll just call her Fatima. We were teaching these classes, adult classes, in a center that we ran, helping them. They didn't know what the internet was. And when Saddam fell, and they were allowed to have the internet, he wouldn't let anybody have the internet or satellite TV. Or cell phones, and only family members could have cars. So it was very limited. And also, there were sanctions against them from the US. And so suddenly everything opened up and everything was everywhere. Cell phones, cars, internet, satellite TV. And it was overwhelming for everybody. And so we had this center and we were teaching people how to use the internet and all these things. And so this young woman came to take a class we were teaching, and we were 3 weeks into the class and we couldn't let her in, and she was just begging. And so my husband said, "Oh, see that lady over there? That's my wife. She'll tutor you." And so she could speak some English pretty good. And so I started meeting with her. But remember what I said before, discipleship starts at the first meeting. And discipleship is little decisions that have depth as you're walking people in relationship into the kingdom of God, right? You don't wait till they get saved and then have some program where they learn the Bible. It's that very first meeting, little decisions with great depth. So upon meeting, I'm establishing this spiritual presence right away with her. I want her to know I'm a deeply spiritual person that she can trust. So before we start studying the program, I ask her if I can pray. I want God to open her mind to be able to learn the concepts. So she sees I'm spiritual. She starts to trust me. So about 3 weeks in, she brings me this comic book that her brother's friend had given her. She's from a big Muslim family. She's engaged to an arranged marriage. And the comic book, I realize, all in Arabic, is the Gospel of Luke in Arabic. And she's like, "I don't understand this. I think it's something about Isa, the Arabic word for Jesus. Isa, can you help me understand it?" Well, she had fairly good English. So I said, "Let me pray about that." No, of course I said, "Yes, I'll help you understand it." I said, "But let's stop meeting here. Are you willing to come to my house?" Because I didn't want her to be in any kind of compromising situation. And so she said she could come to my house. Well, when she started coming to my house, she really started opening up to me. She was in an abusive relationship with the fiance that she couldn't get out of. She would come to my house and she would take off her overcoat and take off her hijab, and I could see bruises on her. She started to really open up to me because, see, she trusted me because we had established this spiritual relationship. And so we started to pray more deeply into those things. And then when I realized the comic book was the book of Luke, I said, my Arabic's not good enough to read it to you, but can we read it in English? And I'll help you understand it. And you can follow along in the Arabic in the comic book. So that's what we started to do. And after every little section, do you remember the prayer that changed my life? God, what do you want me to know? After every little section, we would just do a little listening prayer. I'm teaching her how to hear the voice of God without saying, "Now we're going to learn the 5 steps of how to hear from God," right? I'm just modeling it for her. And so we would do that, and she would sense something or hear a word, and I would reinforce it and tell her to, pray into it or receive whatever she was sensing. It was just little things, but it's a start. And then we got to the part where it says, "And Mary treasured all these things in her heart." You know what I'm talking about? And she bursts into tears. It's talking about, the birth of Jesus. She's holding baby Jesus, and Mary treasured all these things in her heart. And I'm like, "Fatima, tell me why you're crying." She's like, "I don't know why I'm crying." And I said, let's ask God about it. And so we asked God, and I just said, God, what do you want her to know? Why is this so emotional for her? And she said, because God treasures me and his heart, and his identity for me is his treasure. I mean, this is it, right? She's hearing from God and hearing her identity. And it was overwhelming to her. It was just she had no idea, like this experiential encounter with God that took place then. And here's the beautiful thing, Simon. In that Isaiah verse that I quoted, Isaiah 43:1, I have called you by name, so you will know that you are mine. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you go through the fire, it will not consume you, for I will be with you. It doesn't say when you go through the fire, I will pluck you out. I will rescue you. I won't let anything happen to you. In this life, we are going to have suffering. This is part of life. And this is what Jesus is modeling for us, how to suffer. Look at the situations he's in with his suffering, culminating in the cross. He's modeling for us how to suffer, knowing that God is with us. And so, was I able to help her with the abusive situation? Was I able to remove that for her? No. But was I able to help her experience God in her suffering, know how to access Jesus in the midst of the suffering, know how to have a relationship with one that suffered for her and that could teach her how to suffer and not ever abandon her? Yes. And it changed her life and literally saved her life. And so she walked into the kingdom that day. And do you know what? Later, I found out she eventually told her mother what happened to her. And her mother had a Bible hidden in the kitchen and read it every morning before anybody got up, when she got up early to prepare the food for the day. And so here's this tiny little community starting in her household of just two believers. That's how it starts, right? Now, we had to leave the country, a few months later, but I know God is doing a work there. I know he wouldn't abandon them. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
How has that listening prayer, that the spiritual listening antennae out, helped you in positions of danger? Have you had some close shaves where it was God who just oriented you out?
Oh man. Yeah. Let me think which story. The one that comes to my mind again happened in Iraq. We were newly in the country and we weren't allowed to move around freely. And we had an Iraqi security person, of course, fluent in everything and trained to be able to. We were with a non-government organization under the State Department for what we were doing, our team, and each family had a security person that kind of took care of them. And so there were certain days where we could go to the grocery store, and certain days we couldn't. And on this one particular day, they were in touch all the time with the UN and the State Department. The provisional government said that, there's no violence this day and everything's clear. And so if you want to drive around and see a little bit of the city, I can take you out. So we did. And we were going across this bridge over the Tigris River. And it's the Tigris River, and we had a video camera. This is before iPhones. And, it was about this big, those handheld video cameras. And our son's holding it out the window, and, this is the Tigris River, and we're video. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, The biggest fear in Iraq is getting kidnapped, right? You're a
Yeah.
foreigner, you're an American. Our country is bombing your country every night. And there's all these militias apart from, the Iraqi military. There's these little militias everywhere. And the big fear is you're going to get kidnapped. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, these 2 black pickup trucks come out of nowhere and cut us off. Now, we had our Iraqi trained security person. These 2 black pickups cut us off. They jump out of the car and they have AK-47s and they're pointing them at us. I'm in the back seat with our 2 boys and my husband and the driver are up front. It was pretty terrifying. And so, we're just right there. God, what do you want me to know? God, what do you want me to know? And my biggest fear as the only woman in the car, it was to be separated from Jamie and the security guy, but really separated from Jamie. And we used to talk about it all the time. And I would be like, promise me you will not let us get separated. Well, what do you think happens? They take Jamie and the security guard away in one of the trucks and they leave me in our car with the boys and 2 of the machine gun guys. And so that was pretty terrifying. So in the moment, it's really hard to hear from God because what is the number one block from hearing from God? Fear. Fear, it's coming from your amygdala and it's fight, flight, or freeze. In that case, we couldn't fight, we couldn't fly. And so we are frozen. And when you're in your amygdala like that, you cannot access your intuitive mind, your prefrontal cortex. And that's where creativity takes place. That's the part where you are hearing from God. But here's the thing. I had this credit of experiences of hearing from God and this credit of experiences of him getting me, being with me in really hard situations that I could bank on. Because this is what righteousness is. Remember what it says about Abraham. I think it's Hebrews 11, that it was credited unto him as righteousness. Well, what was? He believed about himself what God believed about him. This is faith. God told him, he could hear from God, to go to a land, to leave his family and go to the land I will show you. And God told him he was going to be a father of many nations. He believed what God told him to do, and he believed what God said about him. And it was credited to him unto righteousness. Do you believe what God believes about you? So I'm sitting in that car. Do I believe what God believes about me and what he has showed me over and over and over again about my belonging to him? I have called you by name, so you will know that you are mine. When the fire comes, it will not consume you, for I will be with you. So in that moment, because of the fear, I didn't hear a specific word, but I had this credit of righteousness from experience after experience after experience. And that is what I was clinging to. And my boys, they're teenagers, and Jamie had practiced with them so many times what to do. Jamie is a former law enforcement officer who was recruited by the State Department to be an agent overseas. And he trained our boys every day. What do you do if this happens? And they would make a plan and act it out. And so they were so ready for this. And they were laughing and joking, and they got the guys with the gun laughing. And
wow.
I started singing worship songs because I just didn't know what to do. And Jamie and our driver were gone for about 30 minutes. And, the whole thing was they weren't after us. It wasn't because we were American. We were in a high security zone, and they saw us with the camera, and they thought we were collecting intelligence. And they just wanted the tape off the camera. And the funniest thing was, 2 teenagers in Iraq in a war zone, there's nothing to do. Literally, they can't go to the movies. They can't go anywhere and do anything. So they would make little films in our house. They'd use, their kids. And they had made this like Chinese martial arts movie. And, they had shorts on. And when they started looking at the film, they saw us filming the river. And then they saw her kids like doing karate. And they were just cracking up, hardly clothed. And they were just cracking up like, what is this? And so it ended up being really funny. And but that's one situation where just, that bank of experience. And this is Jesus on the cross. He had a bank of experience of being with God. And in his moment where he really was afraid of not being with the bright presence, he didn't have anything to be afraid of because God never left him. It says it in Psalm 22. Yeah. He never left him. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Donna, I know you've got to go. I'm really frustrated because you've got so many more stories. So thank you so much for your time. God bless you and Jamie, your onward ministry. I'm going to put Identity Exchange link in the blurb and the books and stuff like that because I know people want to hear more. But thanks so much for your time. God bless you, sister.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thanks for having me. Loved getting to know you, and God bless your audience.
So as Donna heads off to her next meeting, I know that she had so much more to share and just loads of stories. And I've listened to her husband, Jamie, too, and like being whisked off by people in a car, that not thinking, well, who knows whether I'm ever going to see my loved ones again. Lots of nuts experience, but living fearlessly. That's what their identityexchange.com is about. So go and check it out. Live fearlessly. That was my experience in Burundi on the dangerous roads in the world, just feeling completely safe. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. That's what Paul wrote. If we're completely surrendered to him, no matter what we're going through. And obviously that was an extreme context of ambushes and people being killed on the road. One time, my friend leant across to me and said, "Isn't it exciting, Simon? We are immortal until God calls us home." And I don't want to say it's cliche, but safety isn't the absence of danger, but the presence of God. And so whatever you're going through, I think the gift of Donna's story to us today is, I loved her question, the listening prayer. God, what do you want me to know? Next time you're feeling really stressed, up against it, out of control, let's get that inner voice going, that inner intercession pleading. God, what do you want me to know? And that could be a complete game changer. So folks, please gossip this podcast, share it with other people. That'd be brilliant. Check out our YouTube. It'd be great to subscribe there. We're trying to push the YouTube from a low base, if you like. So that'd be great if you subscribe to that. But give us a great review on Spotify or iTunes. And next week, another fantastic guest, a very different journey, different story. They're all so beautiful, aren't they? But in the meantime, have a great week. God bless you, and toodaloo. Hey folks, I hope you enjoy the podcast. It was brilliant, wasn't it? So inspiring. Listen, if you are new to us, this podcast goes out under the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, which is a charity I set up in 2003, working in Burundi, Central Africa, currently the second poorest but the hungriest country in the world. And the needs are massive and our work is stunning, and we are impacting hundreds of thousands of lives. We've got 28 organizations. It's the dream team working in business, politics, media, education, empowerment, getting widows into jobs, getting orphans well educated, getting street kids off the streets, getting prostitutes out of prostitution. It is so beautiful. And so if you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd love your backing, and whether it's $50 or £100 or whatever, just stick a zero on that. That's like £1,000 or $500 in terms of the impact it makes out there. And you could do a monthly or a one-off donation. We'd be so grateful. If you want to, it's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired, and I'll put that link in the description below. But yeah, we'd love your support, and it's so good pumping out this good news, isn't it? So if you've enjoyed it, please do support us. greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Link in the description below. And next week we'll have another fantastic podcast to listen to. In the meantime, God bless you. Toodaloo again.